Okay, today I'm gonna reveal a little secret that my 3D printed Shays are hiding. Here you can see one of the headlight prints, and this is actually gonna be the backup light for my current project. And as you can see, the housing is printed separate from what I call the bucket. And this is a kind of a concave shape to it that I paint with the chrome paint that I showed in the video making the glass. And then here you can see the headlight retainer ring. And the reason why I make this bucket separate is that it slides down inside of the housing just like that, and then the ring, when I add the glass, goes on the outside. Now what I actually do that I didn't show is that I glue the ring to the bucket, and I don't glue the bucket or the ring to the housing. And the reason why I do that is it allows me to remove the bucket and the ring without taking off the headlight or the shell. And the reason for that is, as you saw in the other video, I used 1.2 volt bulbs, and we all know the reason why we stopped using 1.2 volt bulbs is because they burn out, and it requires you to take off the shell, which can be a problem on a lot of locomotives. It can be really involved, and you can risk breaking stuff. So what I do, and I got this idea one day when fixing a Christmas tree light, is that I put the 1.2 volt bulb in the bucket with short little strands of wires that come over the edge, and then inside the bucket there's a set of contacts. So when I get a burned out light bulb, I just pull this bucket out, take the bulb out, put a new one in there, and then just push it back in the housing, and I'm back in business again. I can even do it without taking the locomotive off the tracks. But to do that, we have to make these little contacts. And here's one right here. It's very tiny. You actually have to make a pair of them. And they got to go inside this, in this housing here, and there's a hole in the bottom I print. And these contacts go one on each side. It might be hard to see in there, but there's I don't know if I can get that to show up. Yeah, you can kind of see it right there. There's a little edge on there that holds the contact, and I have to glue the contact to that edge. That's probably the most challenging part of this whole thing. So I'm going to make one here real quick, and what I'm using is just some phosphor bronze strip that I had. I cut these little squares off here, and they actually have an edge bent over on them. Let's see if I can show that here. Kind of looks like a letter L, and that's just so that it goes in the bucket. It goes in the bucket like this, so that the wires come down and they brush against this rounded over edge. And it just kind of gives me a gauge when I put these in here to know it stops against that little ledge that's in there, and then I know they're in the right place. So the tricky part here is to solder the wire on the back of these. And actually inside of this bucket, if I can show you what it looks like here. So inside the bucket here, the ledge is shaped like this inside of there, and there's a little groove down the center, and that's for the wire to lay in, and then the wire goes down to the decoder. So it'll sit underneath the piece of phosphor bronze, which is bent over the top of that. So to solder this together, what I'm using here, some very fine wire with the end stripped off. And then I'm going to use this soldering pad I got from Micromark. And I've got some track spikes in here. I just placed this on this board. And I'm just rotating these track spikes over the edge to hold that down. So I don't get my finger in the way. I'm going to use this to hold this down. Okay, now that's clamped to the board. I've got another little spike here that I'll put the wire underneath. So the stripped end of the wire goes right down the center. And then the spike just holds it down to the board. Actually, I forgot one step here. Before I do that, I'm going to coat the wire with some rosin. And what I'm using is just some of this rosin gooey, I don't know even what they call it actually. It just says soldering flux. It's an old Radio Shack I've had for years. I'm just going to put a little bit on the end of the wire. Okay, now that that's centered, I'm going to take some solder here, and I'm actually just going to shave off a tiny little piece of it. Just that big. Probably can't even see that. It's just a tiny little piece of solder. I'm just going to lay it on top of that rosin there. And then I'm using a very small soldering iron. Clean the tip off real quick. And I'm just going to touch that spot. Let's see if I can get it so I can see it too here. Oops. Sorry, everyone. And that's it. I'll try to get a good view of how fine that solder joint is there. There you can see how really nicely soldered that is. So I'll make 2 of those, and I'm going to feed it down inside the housing and glue it in there. Well, I finished painting the headlight bucket with the chrome paint, and the paint I used for that, I showed in the previous video on how I cut the round glass, was this this stuff here. And again, it's painted over a gloss black undercoat. You can see I've got the ring here with the glass already installed, and I already did a video on how I cut that round glass. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this ring to this bucket. And actually, glue is probably the wrong word to use here, because I'm going to use some of this resin here. This is from a 3D printer. And I'm going to take this bucket here and place it down on the glass. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this resin and flow it around the joint here. First I'm going to clamp this. So this is how I'm clamping this. And now I'm just going to flow some of this resin. Doesn't take much, just a couple little drops in there. Had to recenter here. I sometimes forget to stay on camera, but what I'm taking is a few drops of this resin here, and I'm just flowing it around the joint there. Not too much. And the reason why I'm using this instead of ACC is so I don't fog up the glass. And this will actually flow out really nice. There really isn't a good adhesive for glue and resin together. You can't use a liquid adhesive. Okay. Now I'm just going to put this in my cure, under my curing light, and we'll let this harden up here. And before I do that, I'm just going to wipe off a little of the excess here. Okay, now we'll let that cure up for a few minutes here. It's been a few minutes now, and I took the headlight bucket out of the cure light. And you can see that's on there really nice. Flip it over here and see the front. And then we'll just check the fit one time here and make sure it's working as planned. Okay. That looks good so far. Now we're going to get the little light bulb ready, and this is a 1.5 volt bulb. I got this from, I think it was Minitronics or Mintronics, however you say that. Trimmed off some of the leads, but I'm going to trim them a little shorter here. And so I'm just going to lay this across here just to kind of get an idea. And just clip these off. A little past the housing. I'm going to carefully strip back those wires. Okay, with the wires stripped back, I'm just going to bend these down along the side here. So after I bent the wires over the side, I just put a few drops of this crystal clear just on the back of the housing here. And the reason why I did that is it helps hold the bulb in place, so it's not as so frustrating putting it in and having the wire leads turn off the sides here. What it also helps do is keep the bulb centered in the hole. I like to make sure the bulb is in the center of the hole and straight when you look in the end of it, so it's not kind of bent off at some weird angle there. It just helps the appearance of it when it's off. So after that dries, doesn't take very long, then we can stick the bucket here inside the housing. Just like that. And then we'll give it a quick test here to make sure it works. And there you go. You can see, again, it looks really good with that off, and if it burns out, then I just pull the housing out, put a new bulb in, and just stick it back in there. The friction between the wire and the contacts is enough to hold that in there good. And that's how I make the replaceable bulbs in my Shays.